Google DeepMind this week has finally announced and opened access to the Gemini model, the long-awaited Gemini model, which was anticipated to be a competitor to OpenAI GPT models. And from the reported test statistics on Gemini, on the largest Gemini model, Gemini Ultra, it seems to be definitely a competitor to GPT-4. So the long and short of it is Gemini is built up from the ground for multimodality. That means more than just translating audio input into text input. It actually parses and understands audio input as a separate modality. And so on text-based tasks, it seems to be a definite competitor with GPT-4, probably about a draw, but on multimodal tasks, it definitely surpasses GPT-4, the GPT-4 vision branch of the model. What does this mean? It means that there's another competitor on the market, another legitimate competitor in the LLM and productivity space. There are three models for Gemini. Those are Gemini Ultra, which we're going to assume is the largest. Gemini Ultra is the one that you'll see the most statistics posted for because it scores the best generally on capabilities on benchmarks. Up next is Gemini Pro, which is similar in performance to GPT 3.5 or ChatGPT, the original GPT model that was released about a year ago now. It runs faster. That model already is the one built into Bard. So if you go use Bard now, you can go interact with Gemini Pro. The smallest model is Gemini Nano. It's actually really small, and they reported the parameter counts on Gemini Nano, not for Pro or Ultra, but there are two sizes of Gemini Nano that are in like the 1.5 to 3-ish billion parameter range, which is relatively very small for this kind of model. And this model is meant to be deployed on your device. For example, the Google Pixel 8, which has been designed an AI chip, will have the Gemini Nano model running natively fairly soon. Quick recap. It scores very well, competitive with GPT-4 on text-related tasks, on multimodal tasks like image processing, video processing, they say. Video processing could be snapshots. They don't really explain exactly how that works. Audio processing exceeds the performance significantly of GPT-4. However, Ultra will not be available until next year. They say that in the meantime, they're working on reinforcement learning through human feedback, probably doing some red teaming, making sure the model is helpful, make sure the model is safe to interact with. We know that Google generally is more conservative in these kinds of releases because they don't want bad PR. They don't want to release something like the Bing chatbot. There are some demo videos that are very impressive, showing a person taking a video and pulling out a bunch of objects and interacting with it. I think this demo is probably a little bit misleading because it's not really explained at all what the environment is that the model is working in here, but it clearly has very good understanding of images. I've already experimented myself with the new Bard, Gemini Pro, and I would say that it is about on par with ChatGPT. These coding tasks and for writing tasks have been very helpful for both. Actually appreciated on the coding tasks for Gemini Pro. It will create multiple options using multiple different packages by default. Whereas ChatGPT tends to just produce one option. Like if you're doing something in Python, you might want to use one approach or another approach, and Gemini will sometimes offer a couple of approaches, which I really like the way that they've tuned the results for those kinds of coding interactions. The writing seems to work pretty well. So I wouldn't say that we're entering an age of absolute Google superiority. We also don't know what's cooking right now for a Neon background U-star model of GPT-5, of course. But for the time being, it looks like Gemini is the first really valid competitor for state-of-the-art frontier models. There's another announcement from Google DeepMind, which I think shouldn't be overlooked and it shouldn't fall in the shadow of the Gemini announcement, which is an experiment using the Gemini models or using a family of Gemini models. And that's called AlphaCode 2. And AlphaCode is a large family of Gemini models used to solve the really difficult coding tasks. Basically fine-tuned Gemini Pro for problem-solving skills, for coding skills. And then they threw this newly fine-tuned model at an extremely difficult coding data set. These contests in this thing called Code Forces, which are really challenging problems. And long story short, the AlphaCode 2 family of models was able to basically outperform every other coding LLM out there and exceed significantly average human performance on these kinds of tasks. How they did this is interesting. they used a family of these models to generate N samples. And N samples means anywhere from one code sample to literally 1 million code samples. And they have a plot, a logarithmic plot showing 10 to the 1 and 10 to the 2, 10 to the 3, all the way up to 10 to the 6 samples created. So this means this fine-tuned model, probably with some different hyperparameters put in at runtime, like maybe different sampling rates, temperatures, pseudo-random seeds before run. It's not sure those options are going to be yet, but generate, let's say, 1 million different samples, then use some filters to remove about 95% of those. So that's stuff that like literally won't compile. Then from those 5% remaining, which is like 50,000 code samples still, they rate them using a clustering algorithm in combination with another Gemini Pro code model. Then they rank those clusters from 1 to 10 in terms of effectiveness and goodness of code, takes the top cluster and takes the top algorithm from the top cluster. This system of creating tons and tons of different solutions is not the way that a human coder works, because a human coder just tries to really think out the best solution, or maybe able to write a few solutions after thinking about the problem for a while. It is a little bit almost like going onto a LeetCode forum where sort of millions of people are going and solving this problem, and then a few people up at the top are able to really succeed and create the best solution for the problem. But this is the first time we're seeing a machine get this kind of performance on coding problem. However, this approach is not at all feasible for consumer use at the moment, because generating, ranking 1 million different outputs for a single problem is just not at all reasonable. Meta, in a blog post, announced AI Alliance. It's not totally clear what the purpose of the AI Alliance is yet, but they do have a lot of statements from organizations that join the Alliance. The idea is that they're going to, through like member-based leadership, they're going to try to form an organization to provide like thought leadership for the AI space, in particular development of open source models. Collectively, this alliance has a lot of resources. They say $80 billion in research funding. So if they're able to provide high quality leadership at the top and direct that kind of funding towards really interesting open source projects, this could be really significant for the open source space. At the moment, again, it's not really clear what that structure is going to look like, but certainly worth mentioning, keeping an eye on. Last announcement is there's finally really like a legit competitor to the NVIDIA H100 chip. AMD has announced their MI300 chip. They claim that it's faster than H100. And I've really dug into the statistics and the tests. It seems like the consensus is the MI300 is definitely a competitor to the H100. It's really similar in the performance you can currently get out of it. However, this chipset is very new, and we're likely to see software start to catch up, because right now the software isn't really super optimized for using this particular compute structure in coming months. However, the H200 has been, and the consensus is that when the H200 is dropped, it will probably be a definite kind of clean slate and significantly exceed the MI300. However, it's excellent to see more legitimate competitors in the space. Hopefully this will help alleviate backlogs of requests of ordering these kinds of hardware. It'll certainly force everybody to develop faster hardware faster, and potentially, fingers crossed, bring down prices. That's all for this week. It's been a huge week with the announcement of Gemini. If you haven't checked it out yet, go use Bard. Go check out Gemini Pro. Runs really well. And we'll have more to say on Gemini next year when Gemini Ultra is released to developers.